Hi, Michael. Good to see you.
Tim, good to see you, Chris.
So the pandemic, how are you finding it?
Well, on a personal level, it hasn't been too bad. I consider myself quite fortunate in many ways, and for the first time ever, I think I consider myself fortunate for being older. I've never felt that way before, but I see some of the young people who must be having a terrible, terrible time of it in our industry and outside the industry. And I think here's one time where it's actually good to be older, get the vaccine first, number one. Number two, I don't have to worry too much about finances as other people do. And so therefore, I've got to admit with a bit of guilt that the pandemic hasn't been terribly bad. This last lockdown has been a bit, even though you can do more in many ways, it's more tedious in some ways because everything's closed. The museums are closed, of course, the restaurants are closed. All you can do is go for a walk, go in the park, and that's about it. Can't see friends, can't see family, and so forth. So in that sense, it's much more tedious than the previous lockdowns, but it's manageable. And if you're fortunate enough to have a house, particularly one with a garden, that makes it tolerable. But at the same time, I think it's my Jewish guilt. I always feel for people who are in a much less fortunate position than I am, and particularly single people who are having to live often in cramped conditions. And it doesn't totally surprise me that some of them just find it impossible to follow the rules. You've got hormones raging on top of that when you're much younger, and it's very difficult. So whilst it's not bad for me, I certainly recognize that the majority of people are finding it much, much tougher.
No, yeah. It is difficult. And how about
view, Chris? Yeah, sorry. I was going to say.
How about the restaurants?
Yeah, I mean the restaurants are, we're in an appalling state right now. I've got to say I'm not particularly worried because the businesses I'm involved in are going to be solvent, whatever happens. And that's not something I like to say very much, because every time you do say that and the government hears that, they think, oh yeah, it's okay. But the reality is that the majority of middle-ranking restaurants, those who have been doing a very good job, where they've put their life savings into, been earning a reasonably good living, those are the ones who have not been able to build up a very strong balance sheet. And when this moratorium ends, when the VAT thing ends, when the furlough ends, there will be such a huge bloodbath taking place in our industry that I shudder to think about it. But my restaurants at the moment are okay. That may not be the way forever, because this theoretically this lockdown could be extended still.
Well, I mean, that's the truth. I mean, people were talking about 20%, 26% rise in insolvencies after furlough ends. But
more than that. Listen, I've been talking to a major bank recently. I won't say who, but they have told me, and they are the biggest sector investor. And not only sector investor, but the biggest supporter in the sense of having the most hospitality businesses banking with them. People may be able to guess from that who that is, but they have told me that something like 40% is what they're expecting of casualties. And that's pretty high, I'd say. But I think it's going to be worse. I think it'll be worse, especially amongst independents. Depends how you measure casualties. The bigger groups who are able to do CVAs and all that, financial jiggery pokery, that may not be counted as a casualty, but it is in a way. Independents don't have the wherewithal to do CVAs and buybacks and all of that. So they're the ones who are going to suffer the most. And I think the country is going to be very much worse off for them having to shut their doors permanently.
And how do you think we'll recover? How do you see the recovery process?
Everything recovers eventually, Chris. There's no question about it. However bad things are, we're not facing Armageddon. There are already lots of businesses sniffing around for opportunities, and as they should do. It's off the pain of somebody else, but they're doing it. And so there will be a revival. What kind of scares me is some of the bigger groups who are looking out yet for more sites to take on, which has been part of the problem. There's been a huge oversupply in the past, and one way or another, there was going to be a shakeout, pandemic or not. Had to be a shakeout in the restaurant business. And some of these big groups, I think I won't name them, but they're going to continue to make the same mistakes they made before, over expanding, over borrowing, and they will find themselves in trouble again. But I think, the industry, it will be, in my opinion, years before they recover. At the same time, like forest fires, it presents an opportunity for new growth. And there'll be a lot of people out there who will have an opportunity to get a site more cheaply than ever, to get into business for themselves. But there will be, underneath all of that, there'll be a lot of pain that will have taken place amongst people. And, to the point where I believe many will go as far as committing suicide because they have no alternatives. They're in their 40s, 50s, some of them even older. Their businesses, which have kept them going and given them a lot of pleasure for years, suddenly the rug's pulled out from under them. And what will they do? Go work as a chef somewhere else, go work front of house somewhere else, go work in B&Q. There aren't going to be many options available to them. And it's a horrific situation. So, yeah, it's pretty horrible.
So what lessons do you think we can learn from this period?
Yeah, don't play with viruses in labs in China. That's one lesson. The other lesson is this may not please many people, but don't elect clowns as your prime minister. Okay, that is one of the single biggest problem we have right now. The pandemic will always have been bad. There will always be bad decisions taken by the brightest and most committed individuals who are in power. But when you have somebody like Boris Johnson, who is a complete clown, and then appoints a cabinet of clowns, underachievers, gets rid of 21 MPs who have had experience. When you have that and you mix that with a pandemic where, as you know, as everybody knows, the world knows, we are in the worst situation of almost any country in the democratic world. So that's the lesson I learned. Don't, he may have been an interesting prime minister in a good, fun time when nothing important happened. But that's the problem. People forget that stuff happens and that you have to have prime ministers who are leaders and not just caring for what's good in the optics and what's good in the polls. And that is all he cares about. And that's all the cabinet cares about. I'm sure that is a fact. And you have to remember that when you elect a prime minister, you do it for the worst of times, not just, a good guy who makes a good joke occasionally and appears on Have I Got News for You and all of that. Let's not even talk about America. But let's
I was going to say, how do you view what's going on in America?
Yeah, it's waking up from a nightmare for a large number of people. It scares me to death that 79 million people have still been fooled by a charlatan. And you think, how is that possible? I don't think that, the first time around, maybe I could understand it. Second time around, I don't understand why 75 million people voted for him still. That scares me enormously, and I have no explanation. I've not yet heard a single good explanation about why that is. Now, I look at Biden and I think, yeah, that's just looking at this Ms. Psaki, however she pronounces her name, the spokesman for Biden, and just that normality just gives you a sense of relief internally. And you think, my God, that we have really woken up from the nightmare. But Biden has already made some major mistakes. He should have addressed, in my view, what I think he should have done is he should have taken a phrase out of Donald Trump. Word book and said something. I think Trump said, you people will never be forgotten again. He should have taken that phrase and said to that base, I am here for you as well. We have heard what has happened in the last 4 years, and we are going to listen to that, and we are going to make changes. But he didn't. I mean, he's just, following his own plan, and it's going to be an awful lot better than Trump's. But I think he's not addressing the fact that there is a reason. I don't know what that reason is, why 74 million people voted for Trump, and he doesn't seem to be addressing that very well. And I hope he is able to help unify the country, but that will take years. America is not what it is, what it has been. Its tourism is going to suffer enormously. I mean, think about it. It's just the pictures of what happened on January 6th have gone around the world, and that will affect tourism greatly. It'll affect the way American tourists are treated around the world. It's going to take time to heal. We've been through a tremendously interesting 4 or 5 years, and I remember my professor at university, he was an economics professor, and he told us about this saying the Chinese had, whether it's a true Chinese saying or not. It says, and it's a curse, may you live in interesting times. And that really makes sense. It's a curse. It has been interesting. There's no question. None of us have been bored in the last 4.5 or 5 years. And I doubt we're going to be bored in the future, but we'd certainly love to be bored. I think that's for sure.
Now, looking back on your career, because obviously you had a fascinating career yourself, how do you view it?
How do I view it? Through a historical lens.
Because most people probably don't know you weren't a natural restaurateur.
I wasn't.
You were a marketeer to start with.
Yes, I suppose so. I came from a kind of marketing background, and I really fell into the restaurant business almost by mistake, and it really was by mistake. I knew I was working for a big international corporation. The last company I worked for was Hertz International, and I was head of marketing, not at a director's level, but I was head of marketing for the international division of Hertz Rent-A-Car. And increasingly, I had a lot of people reporting to me, and I found that I just didn't enjoy not knowing everybody's name, and also the bureaucracy of the big companies were driving me nuts. There's so much politics going on. It's one of the reasons I'm a Brexiteer and still am a Brexiteer. If we'd had better government now, we'd be in a better position. But I hated the bureaucracy. I hated the politics, and I was looking for a job where I could get to know people and help to motivate them and so on. And I saw this ad for the Chicago Pizza Pie Factory in the days when the Telegraph was the place to go to for ads, and there was an ad for a general manager. So I wrote a letter to Bob Payton, who may not be known to anybody under the age of 45, just as I'm not. And he offered me the job, and that's how I got in the restaurant business. And I found I was somehow suited to it, both from a marketing point of view and also from a detail point of view. And this business is all about detail, and I did okay out of it. And I remember Gary Hawkes, for those of you who remember Gary, always said to me, Mike, I don't understand why you don't have 30 or 40 of these restaurants. And I just was never that ambitious somehow. Don't know why.
Well, as I always tell you, I always admired you because you used to go to the cinema in the afternoons.
Yeah, that's true.
I've always put that down as a benchmark of my success, or a success.
I did that for years. I like to be there early evening or sometimes late in the evening, and I didn't really want to go home. I wanted to go home, but it was just too much of a faff to go home. So I'd go to a movie because I enjoyed movies. And so, yes, that's what I did. And those days were fun. But now I'm leading a portfolio life, which I'm rather enjoying. It's taken me some years, really. I sold really the last business to Cyrus Todiwala back in, I think it was 2002, sold Smolensky's in 1999. And then led this portfolio life, started out as a consultant, and then decided, well, that wasn't very satisfying. So people would come to me and ask for help, often when it was too late. But I got a little smarter, and I said, well, yeah, okay, I'll do this, but I want equity if I can turn the business around. And so that's worked very well for me 3 or 4 times now. And that way I felt more in control. When I was doing the consultancy bit, I could walk away from it and always blame somebody else if it didn't work. Well, they didn't execute well, So if I, in the past and even now, I'm involved in businesses where that is the case. And I feel some element of control. On the other hand, I still work. I'm chairman of a small company, which you know, Arabica. I have no equity in the business, and I don't control it, but I'm reasonably influential, I think, in getting things done. In other businesses, I do control. So I obviously like being in control, but equally that means sleepless nights very often. So there's a trade-off, always a trade-off. So, but it's an enviable sort of life for someone of my age, I think, to be able to pick and choose where I'm going to get involved and what I'm going to get involved with, and generally, I'd say having a fairly good time.
And you have quite, I mean, you have apart from the pandemic, you have a very international life as well, because you spend a number of months up in Sweden.
Sure, we have a house on the Baltic in Sweden. I tell you, the thing I think we miss more than anything is obviously seeing people all the time and being able to go out to restaurants. That's all very important. But I think the travel bit is the single biggest thing that we miss, and and yet I feel guilty about that. I've got a son who he's what's known as in that world a digital nomad. He actually earns a very good living traveling all over the world, working from his laptop, providing marketing advice to companies. But he's also the marketing manager or director for Extinction Rebellion, something
Really?
which I'm very proud that he's doing, and he's doing it for nothing. Nobody there really gets paid anything, and he definitely will not fly unless he can't avoid it. He'll take a train, bus, whatever. Very much like Greta Thunberg. And got me thinking about these flights we take, 4 or 5 times, 6 times a year sometimes. Are they necessary? I got to tell you, I'll probably still fly as much, but I'll feel more guilty. I'm sorry to say. I just keep thinking, it's just something it's very, very hard to give up travel.
But things will change, won't they, as we come out? I mean, people's behaviors are going to change, aren't they, quite dramatically?
I think almost certainly. I mean, I was just writing to one company I'm involved in, looking at their plans, and I said one of the things they hadn't taken into account is that it's a new restaurant that's being built, and I said one of the things they haven't taken into account is the fact that social distancing is going to be with us for the next 18 to 24 months minimum. No question, whatever happens. You will not have people crammed into restaurants anymore. And you've got to take that into account in the design, whether it be with movable perspex divisions, or some restaurants have done, they've built cubicles, haven't they? And rather than just banquettes, surrounded them in a kind of pergola of some kind. And you've got to take that into account. So that's definitely going to change. The social distancing almost certainly will continue. Yeah, I mean, who knows how things will change. Flying, different. It's going to be interesting whether people fly more or fly less. I know in restaurants what will happen. That I'm certain. And there is going to be an explosion of desire to go to restaurants once they open. There's no question. There won't be as many of them. And on the basis of last man standing theory, those that survive are going to do exceptionally well for a period of time. There's no question about that. You only have to look at, the home dining market now. I mean, we order something from some restaurant every single week, sometimes twice a week. And some of the prices that are being charged are restaurant prices for these things, and people are prepared to pay that because they want something a little bit extra and a little bit special. When we open again, really, it's going to be the roaring 20s, no question about it. So that will change. People's behavior will change, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a desire, isn't there, to get back to socializing, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Actually, part of it, I hope that we get that better balance back with relationships and trust again as well.
Why do you think we get trust back again? What?
I think people want trust, and I think people are fed up we haven't had trust.
Okay. Yeah, maybe. I reserve judgment on that. I'm not sure. I think I remember when I first came to Britain in 1970, and remember before then studying comparative economics, and international relations. And one of the things they always said about Britain, there was the expression, which just, you say that to a 30-year-old, you won't know what you're talking about. My word is my bond, talking about trust. Deals, big deals were done on the basis of a handshake. Well, now we're as bad as America in coming up with contracts that are, in a foreign language that normal person doesn't understand. But that's how it was in the 70s. You did trust people. And I'll tell you really a very, very brief story. I came here to go to London Business School, got off the Queen Elizabeth II, which I came over on, took a taxi from, I'd never been to Britain before, from Waterloo Station to the halls of residence in Regent's Park at London Business School. And the cab driver, we couldn't find it. And I said, well, let me get out and have a look, man. I'll knock on a door somewhere, all these big Regency homes. And so I did, and I came back and the cab wasn't there. And I had everything, all my money, everything left with that cab driver because of what I had read about how trustworthy the British people were. And I thought, this is too far. I started laughing in the street. I didn't know what to do. And there was nobody walking around Regent's Park. It was late at night. And so I just started walking. I didn't know where to walk until I found a person, but there was nobody there for quite a while. All of a sudden, about 10 minutes later, this cab driver starts blinking his lights, and it's him. And he says, I found your halls of residence. I took your bags in. And I tell you, I was relieved, but also I was so pleased to see that what I had learned in comparative economics and comparative history, that, the British were trustworthy people. Well, of course, we know the cab drivers in those days and still today, black cab drivers particularly are famous for their trustworthiness. You would trust your children with them. But even so, that was just wonderful. It has gone down a bit since then.
But life's changed, hasn't it? Because if I'm correct, one of the lovely stories I know about you was when you got recruited by Bob Payton, it was on the back of a letter, wasn't it?
It was.
Just a single letter, which would be which make.
I don't know how you remember that, but that is true. And I wrote him a letter, and I had met him, but he wouldn't know that. I just met him as a customer in his first restaurant in Crown Passage, and just to say hello. He's a fellow American. We chatted a few minutes, and that was it. He would never remember me. He had hundreds of customers, and I wrote him a letter, and he called me up and he said, Mike, I've got your letter. When can you start? That was it. And you couldn't look up my background as you can today. You couldn't go to LinkedIn and say, what about this guy? Is he a fake? Is he, what's happening? There's no way to research any of this. So on the strength of this one letter, he offered me the job, and I said, wait, that's very kind. I said, not so fast. I'd like to meet you and chat about it. So, he had to sell the job to me. I had no experience in the business whatsoever. And from the very first day, I still remember walking down the steps of the Chicago Pizza Pie Factory in Hanover Square. And Bob was walking up the steps. It was about sort of 8 o'clock in the morning, hands me the keys, and he says, I'm off to China. It's yours. And he leaves. And there's a particular smell about restaurants in the morning. I can't describe it, but anybody who's in the business knows what it is. It's a smell of food mixed with some rubbish that's being taken out, some stale smoke in the days when you were allowed to smoke in restaurants, a particular smell. And as I walked down the stairs, I thought, oh my God, if I made a mistake. There I was flying business class, or the equivalent of first class in those days, having a serious job with a serious title. And I thought, what have I done? And I went, and I was very lucky that the management, he had hired some very good managers, and they taught me the business. Basically, I said to them, I don't know anything, and just let me observe and watch, and that's how I learned it.
So what advice for young people listening to you? What advice have you got for them? What's one pearl of wisdom you'd give to someone?
I'd say that it's a wonderful business. You've got to work your way up. The one thing I regret is I had a crash course when I got into the business, but I worked a couple of weeks as a waiter. I worked a couple of weeks in the kitchen. I worked a couple of weeks as a busboy, but I really miss having the grounding. Get into this business from the ground up, whatever section, whether it's chefing in the kitchen or out front. You look at Chris and Jeremy, from Corbin and King. They don't have experience of chefing. They started out front of house. You look at Gordon Ramsay, who started out as a chef. You could start off anywhere in the business, but get to learn about it from the ground up, and you will be much, much better. and you'll be promoted faster because there's a great dearth of talent in this industry still. And you'll be promoted faster than you would at most other industries. You can get to a high-paying position that can give you a lot of pleasure. If you don't like people, not the business for you. Don't even think about this business. You've got to like people. You've got to like building teams. You've got to like giving people a good time. And if you enjoy, it's funny, I never have parties at home. I have dinner parties, of course, but I never have big parties. But I love giving parties in restaurants. That's what it's about for me. Whereas I just couldn't, I don't like going to cocktail parties and things like that. But I do definitely like having the atmosphere of a full restaurant where people are having a great time and you're standing there watching and thinking you've played a part in creating this. And it really is only a part because it's the people more on the ground that are the ones who are really creating it. You know, the waiters, the busboys, the chefs and all of that. And you're looking at that, and that gives me a lot of satisfaction. And the other thing that I think gives me tremendous satisfaction is seeing people grow and develop their own businesses. That's always been one of the best parts of what I've done historically.
Well, look, Michael, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for giving up the time today.
You're welcome. I hope it's useful.
Great, and I look forward to actually catching up with you in real life. That'd be the nice.
It would be terrific, and yeah, I look forward to it. I'm sure we'll talk soon, Chris.
I look forward to that. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.